Okay, so we're all here for the panel talk just before lunchtime. I'm Sarah Hamilton and I'll be asking the questions. And this panel is going to be mainly around leadership, challenges in careers, and many questions around what else have we got? Just technology in general and how things are evolving at the moment. So lucky enough to have here our panelists. So if we'd like to introduce ourselves, I'll pass over to David.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. My name is David Anderson. I'm based in Belfast. Where to start? I probably started coding when I was in primary school. Did computer science, worked at telecoms for about 10 years, then joined Liberty Mutual for about 14 years. Worked me up to CTO there, drove the kind of serverless first strategy for Liberty Mutual, the Fortune 100 insurance company. And then wrote a book called The Value Flywheel Effect, which talks about kind of how I did that, and things like worldly mapping, which is how we thought about technical strategy, and then been helping other companies since kind of on that modernization journey, and doing a talk later today as well.
Nice. And going on to Sheen.
Yeah, hi. My name is Sheen Brisals. I'm based outside of London. So my tech journey started early 90s. After a couple of uni degrees, I entered the industry as a software engineer, and been through sort of legacy technologies back in those days, doing C, C++ all the way. So that's one reason why I kind of pitch the entire spectrum, and I often talk about modern technologies. And I've been through big and small enterprises, big enterprises like Hewlett-Packard in their glory days. Oracle, I spent more than 9 years with Oracle Corporation. And my recent experience with working for the Lego Group for 8.5 years, and I was at the peak of their cloud adoption and how we brought serverless into the mix and how we made serverless as a success story at part of the Lego organization, and I played a key role. And that kind of, I learned a lot from there, and also I speak and write about technologies, especially AWS and serverless, interacting with many from the community. So that knowledge allowed me to bring out a book called Serverless Development on AWS, mainly focusing on sort of the enterprise scale adoption. So it's not a book teaching you how to write a Lambda function. It's about one step above, all the practices and things that you need to be mindful of, some of the things I talked in my previous session here. So yeah, so that's me. I'm so happy to be here. I mean, I'm the fourth year at ComSum, so they can't get it off me yet.
And interestingly, myself and Sheen, we worked together for a couple of years at the Lego Group as well. So I've learned a lot from Sheen during my career as well.
Yeah, so by the way, I left Lego Group last month, so I no longer work, but that was my legacy.
All right, moving on to John.
Yeah, hi there. I'm Jon Hammant. Currently work at AWS. I've been here for about 4 years or so. My career journey started when I was very small. So I grew up in a not normal way, council estate over in West London. Fell in love with the BBC microphone when I was 3. I'm very, very dyslexic, so I couldn't spell my own name properly till I was 11. So lots of challenges in school. But it turns out I was really good at tech. I was really good at computers. So I started coding my BBC microphone basic when I was 3. Still remember doing Hello World at first. Then got into Motorola 6800 on the Amiga, mainly to get around copy protection on Secret at Monkey Island at first, and then spawning off to getting around copy protection on lots and lots of games. Then went into, got really even more into tech, did my GCSE information systems when I was 12, got my A-level computer science when I was 13, got into the world of bulletin board systems, acoustic coupler modems, and 2600 hertz tones down phone lines for quite a while. Went through the world of tech, computer science at university, then found the world of free parties, which is another thing that turned up in London, where I'd drive out to random free parties around the M25 and go to all kinds of evening things, which kind of moved my hopefully broadened me out a bit from just purely tech to dealing with people a bit more. Then went into the world of finance tech, so ended up working for a number of large financial companies with one of their lead architects in the London Stock Exchange, ran low latency trading at Deutsche Bank, Goldman's, and then all of infrastructure at Standard Chartered. The strange thing I've realized that it's really, really similar building low latency trading systems as it is building Amiga game demos. Whenever I met them for a long time ago in terms of lots of assembler, tight loops, interesting stuff around that. thought I'd make bit of change in my career. I'd been on the buy side for a very long period of time, went into consulting, ended up leading DevOps for Accenture for UK and Ireland, which was pretty cool, full stack engineering. And then about 4 years ago, thought, I've tried a load of different things. I'll give this whole cloud thing a go. Joined AWS to run the compute business for the UK, then moved up and ran the compute business for all of EMEA. And then now I run the specialist business for Amazon Web Services for the UK. So it's about a quarter of Amazon's UK headcount, and lead effectively all of our specialist projects. Whether that's either EKS and containers and the fun modernization migration stuff, core computing, so the EC2 substrate networking, and then some of the fun stuff around data storage and this thing that we never talk about called AI. And that's me.
Nice. So, and I think if we dive straight into the questions, then maybe we start with you, John. I think we've all had various challenges in our careers, and you guys have been in your careers for a bit longer than I have. So, John, do you want to talk about one of the challenges that you've come across and maybe how you overcame it, and anything that you've learned from that?
Yeah, definitely. So I think people don't realise how many times it takes to fail to get where people are. So, I remember when I was young and I was kind of very green. I remember thinking, I always get every job I apply for. It always seems to work out. And then I think you get more senior in all of it and you realise that actually you don't. You have to fail a huge amount of times to kind of get anywhere. I think when I look at one of the key things for me was really getting used to rejection, which I think is a really hard thing. Like I still remember being bullied at school because I couldn't, I couldn't play football. I was fatter than other people, and I couldn't. A lot of things bad, but in general, that I couldn't. I found some stuff in language hard, and I remember that feeling of rejection when stuff didn't go well still kind of stung pretty dramatically to me. Ended up going to a situation where I write down my failures now. I think actually it's really, really useful when things don't go well. I've realized, and I think this is definitely something both in terms of personal development and in times where you have to kind of grab that nettle. You have to almost work out, why did it fail? Why was this not successful? And I went to a point where when I'd fail on things, I started to write down the reasons through it. I had this kind of book. I found it really, really cathartic to be able to understand and look back. So yeah, I think one of the key challenge for me has been repeated failure for a very, very long period of time. But it kind of turns out that the more you can fail and learn from it, the more that you can kind of succeed. And I think that was one of the things that I really liked with the idea of DevOps, this idea of fast failure, always be iterating. And I think that's probably both the challenge and where hopefully my career has taken stuff.
Yeah, nice. And I think that really relates kind of both in your personal life and then also in technology. I mean, that's just classic, doing postmortems and things like that to try and learn from the mistakes and move forward and do better next time. Yeah. So,
and I think it's always, I think of some of the companies that we've worked with that have turned into unicorns. So we've talked about a few of them have talked on stages. So many of them, the thing that they've done has been able to iterate really, really quickly to get to, what is the customer need? What's that product market fit? And I think that speed of agility and learning from what's gone wrong and being able to be open about that, I think is just really, really key for tech projects.
Yeah, 100%. Moving on to David, do you want to talk about any challenges that you've come across in your career?
Yeah, I'm not sure how I'd say this, but management. Maybe I better explain myself. I think when I was a younger engineer, it was always quite mystified by kind of management and managers in general. And you think, this person doesn't really understand what we're trying to do. I think as I get more senior and and I think as software engineers, sometimes you're sort of hidden or protected from the upper layers of the company. And once you start to see those upper layers, you start to understand like management and directors and VPs and C-suites and what the different, those different lenses. Gregor Holt talks about the elevator architect, the ability to communicate differently as you go up. So I think when as a younger software engineer, you just think, well, I know how this works. This is what this is, no questions. But you don't realize there's a whole bunch of other constraints that you're not aware of. And that whole idea of, and part of the thing in the book about the value flywheel effect is just creating momentum and just going and trying something. And the flip side of that is inertia in the organization. What's the things in the organization that's slowing it down? And it's very rarely tech. It's usually, it could be whatever. It could be a people problem, a commercial problem, whatever. And so I think understanding what management was for and why it was important. And I actually ended up maybe just reading a lot of books and understanding what those things were. So I think when I started to understand the function of management and empathize a bit more with that, I think that was one thing that I got over as a software engineer. So I still haven't flicked over to management. I'm still staying as architect, but I think understanding the constraints and the challenges has been really helpful.
Yeah, I think that is really important because, yeah, I think I've noticed that there's always a lot of friction between kind of the developers and then the business and the higher management. So trying to bridge that gap is definitely an important thing.
And even when engineers say, like, he just keeps asking me for a date, and when you've done it, you go, yeah, 'cause you don't understand the pressure that he's under. Just calm down and enter into a dialogue.
Yeah, for sure. And so Sheen, how about you?
I think I had quite a lot of challenges like everyone, but I learned certain things. So two things, for example, as humans, we are not happy when we fail. We are not happy when we are success. Even when we are successful, we still kind of mourn, right? So I learned that there's always a balance. Even if you make mistakes, there's something else, good coming around. For example, recently I was speaking at a couple of universities and for students. So I gave them kind of a picture of, okay, here is a leadership or the, sort of a technical leadership ladder. Here is a pure technical. So for example, growing from engineer, principal engineer, et cetera, to the top level, or as a, engineering manager, director, et cetera. I was thinking, wish I had this clarity as I was growing in the industry, because I never, bothered to look at the ladder or career ladder. I was always attracted by the technology. So I moved horizontally rather than vertically. Then I always used to kind of mourn, wish I could have gone this way. But then I think, had I gone that way, I wouldn't be here doing serverless or talking about all these things, right? So that's what I mean, like, we always, complain, but we should be happy with, what we have or where we are. The second thing I learned over the years is, if we really need something and if we really put the effort, we will get it. So back in the 90s, for example, I grew up in India and I started my initial career in India. So I was used to be fond of Microsoft Press books those days, Charles Petzold, one of my favorite authors of those days. So difficult to get hold of the books back in Bangalore those days. So I used to kind of, campaign for it with my company I was working for, get the budget and place the order and wait for weeks or months to get those books. But eventually I used to get them. The same thing even these days. For example, a few years ago, when I started into cloud, everyone is talking about certification, this and that. I go to, AWS summits and there is a special area for certified lounge. They won't let me in. So I took that as a challenge. And before the next AWS summit in London, I got few certifications and I went there with, full authority, barged in, got all the swags and things. So it may sound like, silly, but the point is, if you really need something, if you want to get somewhere, if you put the effort in, we can really, do that. So that's also the reason how I, became the author, because that was never in my dream to do that. That happened because often in life you get trigger points, like one trigger leads to something else and leads to. So if you make use of those simple, small opportunities, and if you make that as a big thing, that is what, your career or life will become. Or we can sit and mourn, but that is not going to, make anything better for anyone. So that's kind of my learning. And so that's probably the reason why I'm still here.
And I've definitely seen that hard work and perseverance with yourself, Sheen, like seeing you write the book while we were working together. I could see, you had put in the dedication and it really paid off. So moving on, I want to talk a bit about how leaders can have such an impact on the product that you might be working on overall, and it can have a domino effect for years to come on the way that the product goes technically and both in a product sense. I think, David, you've talked a fair bit about in the past, like technical strategy and how managers and leaders are actually quite different concepts. So do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, well, I think it's like I've always been not obsessed, but I've been like a broken record about technical strategy. Any company I've been in, like, what's our technical strategy? What's our opinion on how technology will solve our problems? And the technology strategy is never just a name. It's not just serverless. That's not a strategy, you know. So one of the things that I've always tried hard to do is think about what's the need from the organization. Do we need to be faster or cheaper or more innovative? Like, there's a high level need that usually the board and the CEO say, this is what we need, this is how we want to operate as a company, and try and translate that down to what the team are doing. So about 10 years ago, I discovered Wardley mapping with Simon Wardley, that strategy of thinking about every capability. If you think of a capability instead of a technology, every capability will evolve over this kind of evolutionary axis from being Genesis to be brand new and kind of magical to custom, which means we know how to do it, but it's kind of difficult, to product, which means there's now customer need, to utility or a commodity. Now, Gen AI, maybe 3-4 years ago, was Genesis, it's magic, and now it's moving to custom. I think now it's product, well, there's demand. It will become utility, and something else will be built on top of it. So once you start to think about that, like, AI is not a strategy either, but using a capability to do something for your business, like as Luke was saying, that, like, you know, to send packages out for your company, that's the capability. So how can the technology help you? So it's really trying to be very clear in that capability, and then what your risk appetite is. Because the second part of that is, are you quite risk averse? Are you willing to take a risk? Do you want to be an early adopter? Like, do you want to jump on the new technologies as an organization? Or do you want to kind of wait and see how it plays out? So I think trying to think in that lens about what's this capability and what technologies will solve that, and try and actually talk about that around the technical leadership in the organization, and then the ability to maybe just explain that to different levels in the organization. I think that's been so important, and that's how I was able to do a lot of the serverless first stuff in Liberty, because I famously remember a meeting a good few years ago when one of the presidents of the business was like, I don't care about Lambda or whatever, I really don't care about that, but if this guy has just lost his house with a hurricane, I want to be able to help him as quick as I can. You go, okay, right, that makes sense, you know. So it's almost like, let's help our customer. I don't care how we get there. So I think being able to talk about the strategy and think about how it evolves and how much risk you want to take, and just taking it right back to the lens of, like, you know, what does the organization need, as opposed to the latest technology that I maybe want to play with. That's a different thing.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because I think there's so many technologies or new things that come out and people just kind of want to hop on them. And sometimes it pays off really well. Let's say if you had adopted Lambda early on, then, you know, it's still going strong now. But on the other hand, things come about and then it kind of dies off after a year or so.
Yeah.
And so do you think that's kind of thinking about the capabilities is where that's going to help you choose what to adopt?
Well, I think so. I mean, even like language choice, I often sort of say I don't really care about language choice. It's more like it's a convention. Are we all happy to use the same language, as opposed to what's going to be the coolest language? But I think being able to spot a trend in the market is also important. And getting that. I mean, we started using Lambda, I think we were there at the launch in 2014 and jumped on it straight away. Right in those early days, there was a lot. It wasn't what it is now. There was a lot of funky behavior in there, but all that evolved, you know, and it got better. And again, I suppose thinking from an evolutionary perspective, you knew that was what would have been quite Genesis when it came out, but it rapidly evolved to where it is today. So I think it's about that risk appetite.
Yeah, 100%.
Just to jump in, I think it's really interesting. I mean, we often used to talk in the consulting world about this concept of CV-driven development.
Yeah.
So, you know, when React turned up, so I was running a largest team, we had a load of Java developers, you know, these companies that were, you know, they had lots of Java skills and Java developers, and they were making good applications out of it. And suddenly the view came, we need to do this in React. And we would kind of go through it, and normally it would be one person who had kind of worked out they wanted to do this, so it kind of died. But in terms of, you know, where do I see this working? So there's kind of the other side to the story. So if I think through my career, actually, you know, decisions that went well were really to focus on low latency, and then focusing on DevOps and containers at the kind of the right time. The reason behind that, why I think it's a more accurate thing, if you focus on not the way of doing something, but the kind of what that gives, the value that it comes out. Yeah, and I think that's the way that I would encourage people to do. Exactly the same way that just focusing on specific bits of how an LLM works or things like that. It's harder focusing on actually the benefit that AI will have in the future, or some of the. I think that's kind of. I think those are the bits to follow on from a career and a skill perspective sometimes.
Yeah, just very briefly, a friend of mine, Mike O'Reilly, has this great measure. He calls it the cool measure, the cool count. So whenever he's an architect, whenever a developer says, I think we should use React Native, it's really cool because it's really cool the way it does this, and it's really cool. He counts the number of times the person says cool, and if it's 3 times, like, we're not doing it. Why not? He says, because you don't know why you want to use it. You just think it's cool. And he's like, yeah, it is cool. Right, go away. Figure out why it's cool.
I like that a lot. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah, there you go.
Nice. So, no, go ahead, Sheen.
No, just want to add something in. So the way I see the leadership when it comes to technology and management, kind of slightly different, because if you're a technical leader, your job is to bring in the creativity or influence the technical minds and that way. Whereas the management is more of the process efficiency, taking care of the empathies and sympathies and all sorts of things. So often the mistake happens because people don't evaluate, people don't understand the reality we are in. For example, we built systems where, with waterfall model where, customers waited for months to get something out. But things change now. Like, as we all know that the concentration span is 12 seconds or 8 seconds. So that's sort of the world we are living. So that means the iteration also should kind of, match up. What happens, some of the kind of technology leaders is that they influence with their skills. That means they're trying to influence with past skills to do something for the future. Instead, what they need to do is they influence with their experience, not the skill, to enable the modern, technology. That is a crucial thing that, as a technology leader, I think we should keep that in mind, because otherwise, organizations can go, the backwards. So that's what David said. Assess what's happening in the industry. What is what capabilities do we need for this organization or the team or customers? Then identify the right technology, then push it, forward.
Yeah. So, John, what qualities do you think are really important in a leader?
Yeah. I really agree. There was an interview with Zuckerberg the other week where he said that leaders should be technical and should know what they're doing. I'm a firm believer in that. I genuinely, rightly or wrongly, I think that everyone should understand the thing they're working on. I still play with lots of technology. I would hope most AWS leadership still actually log on to it sounds like a really obvious thing, but if you're doing something in cloud, no matter what level you are, whether you're top or bottom, you should be logging on and you should be spinning stuff up in the cloud. Like, that sounds like a really obvious, and I'm sure most people realize that, but a lot of people don't seem to realize that. So I think if you don't know what people are doing, you can't stay with it. So I think that whole concept of servant leadership, of actually understanding what it is, not asking people to go through things that you either wouldn't or couldn't. Totally get that, it comes to a point where I can't spend the amount of time that I would like to on some of these things, but I think you still need to have that interest around it. I think the other piece that I think is really, really key to leadership is, and I think it's not even leadership, it's life. Like the real point in life is to try and understand yourself. I think fundamentally, you are the only thing that you can ever change is you. Everything else you can influence, but you're not really in control of it. I think some of the best leaders out there are the ones that understand themselves, both in terms of their flaws, the things they're good at, and then kind of allow other people to fill in for that. I really like being transparent with my team, and a lot of it is quite honestly for my benefit as well, because I'm really rubbish at lots of things. So it's really, really helpful for me to be able to say what I'm good at, what I'm not good at. And if you all trust each other well enough that no one's going to take advantage of that, then that's how really good teams go. And I think by doing that from a leadership perspective, you encourage other people to do the same thing. And the best teams are the ones that, they laugh together, they cry together, they're vulnerable, they're strong at the same time. And I think it's a hard thing to do, but it's, that's got to work.
Yeah, 100%. I think, showing that kind of vulnerability really helps people to respect you because they can relate to you in some way as well.
Yeah, and it takes away any weapons as well. Like, in the end of the day, if you're, I mean, like, when you do with products, you're much better if you're shipping a release and something doesn't work, tell people this thing doesn't work. There is a problem here. Because it is a much better way of going through things. If you can lead with your faults or with the challenges, I can describe my challenges in a better way than maybe someone else looking in and going, well, they're just trying to hide that. So I think that transparency, I just think is really, really key to it.
Just brought something back to my memory when John mentioned about transparency. I think quite a few years ago, I read a book called An Everyone Culture. I don't think it was a popular book, but its concepts was like make everything open. So teams gather around, they don't talk about the success, but their failures, their drawbacks and disadvantages. That's the way kind of everyone can kind of make others improve. So yeah, so I like that book, but I think it's so hard to implement some of those concepts in the book. But and everyone culture book, yeah.
Nice. So before we wrap up and open to the floor, I just want to ask one final quick-fire question to you all. And it's, if you were to do something differently in your career, what would you have done differently?
Okay, first, you don't know.
Go on, jump in.
I need second
I didn't want to put one person on the spot.
So I realized I was working as a consultant for a large investment bank where I was being paid on a day rate. They could fire me at any time. Be very aware I'm supposed to be doing and this is my early 30s actually. I really thought I was doing what I should do, what I was told to do, and that had always been my way. And maybe other people realise it sooner than me, but I always thought I was there to do what my job was told to do. I noticed that they were doing a multi-billion-dollar transformation at the time. Some people don't understand systems a lot of times. People didn't realise the details. Effectively, they were going from a horizontally aligned systems into vertically aligned systems. So they had this problem that no one had realised, where if you keep adding systems onto that, you end up hitting this square of complexity. The whole thing wouldn't work. It was going to be, and I could see this billion-pound thing going with all these really senior people who'd been looking at it for a really long period of time. And I remember thinking to myself, this isn't going to work. This is a terrible idea. And then so I stopped doing what my job was supposed to be, and I went off and I wrote I'd never done anything like this before. I wrote basically what was kind of a paper. So I wrote this big long paper that said what I thought the issue was going to be, why I thought it was going to be an issue, how I thought we could fix it, and kind of stuff like this. Went through, gave it to my boss, who I think had wondered where I'd been for the last 3 weeks, because I was working at home a lot. I just kind of went off and did this. Gave it to my boss. He turned around and said, "This is amazing. Who told you to do this?" And I remember saying, "No one did. I just kind of did it myself." He went, "That is fantastic." And it literally went from that to me being in front of the CIO of this very, very large Swiss bank within about 3 days. Every meeting, it always started with, who told him to do this? And then going, he's just done it himself in this most incredulous big thing. And I feel like after that experience, something snapped in my head where I just kind of went, oh no, I'm not being paid to be what I'm told. I've been hired because of me. And as weird as that sounds, and it was this weird revelation that I'd never had before. And then so after that, I've just kind of done what I think is the right thing. And I do that now. I tell everyone else to do exactly the same thing. Because if I'd done it much earlier, my career would be way better. Well, not way better, but it would have been different. So I think the biggest tip I would have for people is realise that you are hired for you, not for the thing you think you're being hired for, and go and do what you think is the right thing. And I think that's, I wish I'd known that earlier, basically.
Yeah, I think that's a huge learning, for sure. And how about you, Sheen?
I think a regret I still have is, I think back 2009 or 2010, as part of the Oracle engineering team. And there was some instruction from the top to explore AWS for whatever reason. Because, if you know Oracle, they usually chase other companies. And I had a look, and it was EC2 that I looked at. It looked same as those days we used to get the VMs provisioned just like that. I thought, okay, something, just something like that. That's where I dropped it. I never explored further to see what was out there as part of the AWS. And I always regretted when I started to know serverless somewhere 2017 from 2018. I wish I lost 6 or 7 years of AWS. But my advice would be for engineers is like opportunities when they come around, just grab them because you can't, wait for things. So again, recently to engineers, I told them about 2 ways, like finding opportunities and creating opportunities. So I gave 2 examples. Like for example, if you take a spider web, it creates the web. Basically, it's creating an opportunity to, catch insects. Otherwise, it will go starving, right? There's no guarantee the opportunity is going to happen now, but it is creating that opportunity. But if you take a bee, a honeybee, it has to come out of its hive, finding opportunity, looking for all thousands of flowers every day. For them, he has to find the opportunity. So both we should keep in mind because nobody is going to, present you a opportunity in a silver platter, right? We need to create and find opportunities. I always say this to engineers because something I also learn, always learning from my own life as well.
Yeah, I really like that analogy of the spider and the bee. Nice. And lastly, David.
Cool. Very good. I've got a regret and a disappointment. So my regret, I was at a fintech conference 10 years ago and they were selling Bitcoin and I didn't buy any.
Oh.
Now, what's this stupid currency thing? So that was a regret. But disappointment or learning. Actually, probably similar to John. There's something about courage and empathy. Courage and empathy, those 2 things together. I think as an engineer, sometimes you think, well, I'll let the leadership worry about that. But I believe everyone is a change agent and everyone's a leader. So you need to bring that behavior. So there's a bunch of times early in my career where I probably could have spoken up or tried to understand what the need is. It's an obvious thing to say, stay abreast of the latest technology. I think we should all do that. But technology without a need, it's just like a hobby, it's just a fun thing, So if you understand the technology and then when you have the empathy and the courage to ask a question and understand where that need or where that requirement or where that directive or objective is coming from, you can then think, I think there's something here. I spent a lot of time in executive teams and a guy said to me one time, he says, I've learned your trick. I know what your trick is in the executive team. I was like, this would be good. I said, well, what is it? He said, when the CEO asks a question, you keep quiet and you wait until everyone else has spoken. And you know the answer, and then you speak last. And then that's the answer. I can see what you're doing. I was like, well, that's actually not what I'm doing. I'm listening to the question. These are all talking nonsense, but I'm sitting thinking, and I don't talk until they actually think of something sensible to say. So, have the empathy to understand where is this question coming from, what's this need, and the courage to maybe stay silent and to speak up when you have something to say, and not just, seems funny on a panel, not just fill in air, you know what I mean? So I think for me, if I had learned that when I was a lot younger, with courage and empathy, I think I'm pretty happy with how things have played out, but that might have avoided a few arguments.
Nice. So I'd like to open it up to the floor. Does anyone have any questions for the panelists?
Really enjoying listening to the conversation. I have a question that relates to a theme you touched upon, which is adoption of new technologies. So I'm a consultant. I work with a lot of companies who've moved to the cloud maybe in the last decade or so. One of the things I see is you were talking about CV-driven development and somebody bringing some new tech in, but I've seen quite a lot of organizations who did a lift and shift from on-prem into the cloud. And what they're using in the cloud today looks exactly the same as it was when they did the lift and shift. They've not adopted any of the new services. They haven't responded to the changes in pricing. So I'm wondering, have you got any lessons you've learned you can share about how to adopt technology? Because it just seems to be something that a lot of enterprise architects really struggle with.
Yeah, well, I can maybe take that briefly. That's what I wrote the book about, is basically that problem. It's modernization, not migration. Because Gregor Hope says if you just lift and shift to the cloud, you just have a fancy data center that you're not allowed into. So the whole idea of modernization is a much bigger thing. You know, we need to understand why are we doing this? What are the different ways of working? We can't just carry what we used to do forward. So I think that I think is a people problem. You know what I mean? You have to really get behind who's trying to do that. So I think I cover a bit of that in the talk after lunch. But I think that's the biggest challenge in the industry today, that people not realizing like the impact of modernization, you know, and like DevOps had it covered really well 10 years ago, but we still haven't really embraced the true kind of goal of DevOps, which is removing those silos and fast flow. So that's still, I think, an unsolved problem.
I can give you a really AWS answer. I put my Amazon hat on. Or maybe not related. The thing I would recommend everyone do is ask for help. I really, really, really do think that. I think we are, as Amazon, a moderately impenetrable organization sometimes. We have loads of resources that are around specifically to help with things like this. That is the reality. Sometimes they're quite hard to find, sometimes they're easier to find, but they are there. So one, getting help. But there's a load of people around here that you can find and they'll put you. So asking help from Amazon. I think asking for help from partners. There are some really, really good partners here today. You know, Steamhouse, PA Consulting, some other folk as well. I think having partners do it, I think is really useful for that short start spike. And then the final thing, which is a really tactical perspective, getting partners and AWS to work together on it, because there is loads of funding that we have. We really do have like a lot of funding that we will help fund and grow these things and do it. And I don't think people necessarily, can't find it written on the website always, but it is definitely there. So, you know, talking with us, talking with partners, like the resources are there. You just kind of need to find the right people for it.
Moving on to the next question.
Hi, Rick, consultant. Been a consultant for about 8 years, and I tend to see in the businesses that we go into really similar patterns. And one of the things that we see all the time is they've developed an almost top-down leadership. So the leadership go away and they dream up the next product iterations, and then it gets pushed down into the product teams and then eventually into the developers. And this comes from this whole ethos of we need to shield the developers. But the developers fundamentally will only push to production what they understand. So why do these leadership patterns emerge where you feel like you need to shield the why from the developers?
Did you catch that question?
Yeah. So the question was like, there's often top-down technology strategy, and leadership generally feels the need to shield the developers. And I think there's a massive challenge around when an idea is generated from the executive, it'll bounce around for a long time, and then it finally hits the development team. Boom, they delivered it in 2 weeks. Well, aren't we great? It's like, well, we thought of the idea 6 months ago. It just bounced around the exec team for 6 months. One of the things I think we did quite successfully in Liberty Mutual, was we used to call it the kind of pincer movement. Yeah. And I think the role of the CTO was critical here. I think the other leaders also have a play, but specifically the CTO, I actually used the phrase the technology ambassador, because if you're in those leadership meetings, but then you also understand the technology and start like a grassroots movement. I mean, we had started doing serverless POCs, getting the excitement, the community together from engineers really early on, while the top-down conversations were happening. So the time the remit came down from on high, the engineers were off and running. So I think you have to create that kind of pincer movement. And as sometimes it's the messy middle where it gets complicated, as John Cutler says. But I think it's absolutely critical to give the engineers kind of a head start and expose them to those conversations.
Can I add something? I think probably Sarah, you can also answer the same thing. So when it comes to technology decisions and stuff, there are two things, like, you know, the strategies that usually happen, CTOs and the top leadership, that's fine, you know, whether we go to cloud or not, etc. But when it comes down to day-to-day technologies, I always push for engineering teams to own that. So that's why in my previous talk, I talk a lot about smaller teams and the ownership. So it's so important to bring that ownership culture into engineering teams. So that will kind of enable them to make decisions. Other thing I always recommend and push forward is to make engineers as architects. So doesn't mean that they should all, hold the architect title. To get involved in bringing up the architecture for the product or feature or whatever they are, going to build. It could be one engineer or two engineers working together. That is the only way they learn. Otherwise, they simply become, programmers and get to, do what somebody else said. So this is so successful, and you can add from your own experience, right? What happens in your teams you work on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is super important to be able to delegate those decisions to the teams. And also, I know you were talking about kind of why does management shield the engineers from the why? And I think that's a massive mistake if that is happening. I mean, I personally feel like a big part of my job satisfaction as an engineer is actually delivering some value. Like, it can be fun to play with new technologies, but I think after a while you start to realize you want to do something quite impactful and meaningful, and you don't just want to be told what to do, you want to be able to challenge back and forth. So I think that, we really shouldn't be shielded from the why is the answer. I think it does happen. I've experienced it myself. But I think we need to try and work better. And I think engineers should be asking more questions. I don't think it's just on leadership to provide that. I think they should be demanding that they know why they do it before they push into production.
So I mean, I can tell you how we do it and why I think it's maybe got worse a little bit. So in terms of how we tend to do things, the idea is that everyone is given input and output goals. You're given things that go into the sausage machine, and this is from service teams, everyone within the world of Amazon. You have things that go into the sausage machine. So what are you going to commit that you're going to do that will make something happen? And you have the goals that are going to come out of it. So, depending on what team it is, that might be about services, that might be about customer, whatever it is. The bit in the middle, we leave to the individual teams and the individual people to work out how they're going to do it. And that is a really, really important thing, because it's really fun to be able to invent and do things in the way that you would want to do it, and kind of be able to push back when you think it's not a great idea. I think some of the engineers asking more questions, I think over the last year has maybe been challenging. I think the fact that the overall tech market has been a bit more challenging, I think has made people a bit more worried about failure and a bit more worried about putting their head above the parapet. I think that's hopefully changing a little bit now, if I'm honest. But the key thing I would say, it's what do you want to go into the sausage machine, what comes out, and then giving engineering teams the freedom to do the bit in the middle.
Just very briefly, there's a really interesting model. There's a guy called Dr. Ron Westrum, who's got this model of organizational culture. It's in the Accelerate book by Nicole Forsgren, and he's got this thing, and he's actually like a psychologist from the States. He talks about information flow around the organization, and there's three different types. There's the pathological organization, where knowledge is power, and I know this, and no one else knows, right? It's not good. Then there's the bureaucratic organization, which is we know this knowledge, but it'll go down through the layers, and you'll get it eventually. And then there's the generative culture, where everything is transparent and open, and everyone learns in the open. It's the generative kind of organizational culture. That's what you want to be shooting for. And I think that's a really, and he observed this like outside tech, but like it's a really interesting theory. He's got a whole bunch of stuff written on it. It's Dr. Ron Westrum.
Nice.
I might.
You're going to have to cut us
yeah.
there, aren't we? 'Cause
So-
it's lunchtime.
Massive round of applause, please. I think that could have gone on and on. It was fascinating. So thank you all. I'm going to try and pitch the collaboration zone once again. Sheen will be there with his book. Once they've grabbed some lunch, perhaps these guys could also make their way there. So if you've got more questions, meet them there. Everyone knows where the collaboration zone is now. Yeah. Oh, yes. Actually, sorry. Before you move.
Every chapter in the book has an expert answering 4 or 5 questions related to that particular chapter. Chapter 2 is about enterprise adoption. Who is the expert? Man here. Right? And another chapter about serverless testing. Who is the expert answering the question? Sarah. So another expert, Jan, is around. And Luke, who spoke about post-terminal, he wrote the case study. And Luca is one of our technical reviewers. So you have all the experts who contributed, to the book are here.
Great book, great book.
Fabulous. Good point. Right. Enjoy lunch.